let's continue our discussion by looking at causal claims. And in this case, we're going to use all four big validities. So we're going, for causal claims, we're going to be thinking about external validity. Is it generalizable? Statistical validity. Are the study's conclusions reasonable and accurate? Construct validity. Do the variables really measure what they're supposed to? And internal validity here, we're looking for, are there other explanations? And this is perhaps even more important than external validity here. So we're thinking about construct validity. You know, we want to make sure that both the manipulated variables, or what we're going to call independent variables, and the measured variables, or our dependent variables, make sense. You know, whether they are good operationalizations of our construct. We're going to think in terms of external validity. Do the results generalize to other people or contexts? Here, not as much important. And in general, as internal validity increases, external validity decreases, and vice versa. Statistical validity, how strong is the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable? So is there a statistical difference between the groups? Generally, we're using things like t-tests or chi-squares or MANOVA or ANOVA, something where we can look at our groups and see that there is a significant difference. So part of what gives us some internal validity is using an experiment. And there are some specific things that we're looking at here. You know, experiments, we are randomly assigning people to different levels of the independent variable. So in this case, our self-immersed group, our third person group, and our hardworking hero group. So these are each our independent variables, often, not always, but often put on the x-axis of a figure. Our dependent variable often is on the y-axis. It's our outcome variable, our measured outcome. And in this case, it's what percentage of time were 6-year-olds did they spend on some sort of boring task? Okay, and random assignment, we want to be able to exclude the idea that people end up in one group or another based on, you know, some other factor unrelated to our hypothesis. So as we are interrogating causal claims, we're focused on three issues. We're focused on covariance. We're paying attention to temporal precedence, and finally to internal validity. So you're going to be seeing this repeatedly over the next several weeks, probably most of the semester. We want to know, are these three things present? So with temporal precedence, let's look at a study on social class and self-regulation. So in this study, the researchers randomly assigned some people to think of themselves as higher in social class and others as lower in social class. Next, the participants were shown a jar of candies, presumably meant for children in another study. They were then left alone with the candy jar, and candies eaten were counted. So first question is, which came first? Was it the social class intervention, or was it the eating? Right? And this is the way it looked. And what we see here is temporal precedence, that social class came before the candies eaten. We also see some covariance. So the number of candies eaten was different based on assignment of groups. Okay, so perceived high social class covaries or is associated with high numbers of candies eaten. With internal validity, we're looking to see, is there some other variable that might have explained this? So possibly one thing that might explain it is that maybe the children in the high socioeconomic group liked candy more than those in the low group, perhaps. And this is the reason for random assignment, that we have no reason to believe that there is any difference between the two groups, at least if the groups are large enough that we can really believe that on average, they are similar. So small groups, hard to do random assignment. Say fewer than 10 in a group. With a group of, say, 50 for each group, it becomes much easier. Now, again, we're also interested in construct validity, always, regardless of what kind of claim we're making. We are interested in external validity, just not as much. And we're interested in statistical validity. So when do causal claims, when are they a mistake? So for example, does social media pressure cause teen anxiety? We know that there's covariance, that in general, teens who felt more pressure to respond immediately to social media, when they're getting a text or some other kind of notification, we're also more anxious. So we have covariance. The problem is we don't know about temporal precedence. This research was correlational, and so both variables were measured at the same time. So we can't really make a good causal claim as a result. And we don't have internal validity as a result. Again, it's not an experiment. We have not randomly assigned people to different groups. Perhaps there is some other variable that might explain what we're seeing here. So we do that in response to any causal claim. Chewing gum can improve your mood and focus. And you might think about, how could we design an experiment that actually tests this claim? So that's your task here. Think about what variables you would use. Are those variables high in construct validity? Right? What kind of measure of mood and focus are you using? Does it matter what kind of gum? I hope not, right? But maybe. And then I think it's useful, certainly in terms of data visualization, to sketch a graph of your expected outcomes. Now, if you were reviewing somebody else's study, you might want to ask, about internal validity. You'd want to be asking about external validity. You'd want to ask about statistical validity. Trying to make sure that this is a good measure of our hypothesis. And, think about how your questions hang with the 4 validities that we're talking about. You just want to have that all under your belt. So finally, we're going to be prioritizing our validities, and that's going to depend in part on what kind of claim the researcher is making and what's important to them. But these are the kinds of things that you might be asking, or that I would be asking if I were being asked to review this research. Finally, we're finishing chapter 3. There are a number of different terms that we've talked about in this chapter, many of which we will talk about in coming chapters. Make sure that you're going through using the 4 steps of metacognition. Make sure that you are working through some of the exercises that I did or didn't talk about in this video. There's always more in our PowerPoint. And don't just memorize terms. Make sure you're thinking your way through. And take care. Bye-bye.